Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming with us this evening. My name is Méline Lafabrie. I am the founder of Idoni, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm very happy to introduce to you Kelsey Fleeter, who will be my guest tonight. She's a communication expert, and we'll be talking with her about the value of connecting organizations on the ground with people who can share their stories, the value of impact journalism. Before we get in, I also like to introduce you to, here they are, Marina and Charlotte were two of the volunteers of Idoni. They're going to be managing all the back end of this evening, so we make sure everything goes smoothly. They're going to also be taking a look at all the comments you leave in the comment section. So if you have any issues or any questions, they'll be talking to you. They're also going to keep track of the questions. And then at the end of the hour, we're going to have a little Q&A moment. So if you have questions, ask away as we go, and we'll come back to them when we're done. So, all right. See you later, girls. I'm going to put back just Kelsey. Okay, so before we start, if that's fine with everyone, I'm gonna start by introducing a little bit of Idoni, because this is our first event, so not everyone knows us and know about us. So Idoni is a brand new NGO. We're creating a community of journalists and agents of change who are all working within topics related to social and armed conflict. And we have three different purposes, which is connect, inform, and empower. So we connect the journalists and the agents of change, being the activists, the social workers, the educators, the experts, and all of this. And we create a safe space for them, to meet each other, to exchange ideas, advice, and maybe even collaborate if they want to. And hopefully, thanks to meeting like this, they can produce a more constructive, inclusive, and solution-oriented journalism that can inform better the citizens around the globe. And thanks to this information that we put out there, people can feel empowered, because they can see that change is happening. It's happening everywhere, all the time, at many different levels, at many different paths, in many different ways. And if they want to, they also can take part in this process. So, Kelsey, thank you so much for taking the time and coming with us. I could introduce you, but I think you're the better person to do it. So if you can tell us a bit more about, what you do, where you do it, about you, go ahead.
Sure. Well, first, thank you, Méline and Idoni, and everyone who's part of the team who's helping to make this event happen. I was really excited to get the invitation to participate because I think this is a really interesting point of intersection within journalism, what we think of public relations and communications, and even a lot of impact and mission-driven work. So thank you for that. A little bit about me. So my name is Kelsey Flitter, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ruby Group, which is a communications agency that I started in June of last year. And we focus on really connecting the US and Latin America. A lot of my experience has come from studying, living, working between the US and Latin America. And it's both regions that I'm very passionate about, being American, but having lived in different countries. And a lot of what we do is we work with a variety of clients, but as we're growing, I'm really looking to go after these kind of purpose-driven clients and mission-driven clients, because I think that those are the stories that are so often the most interesting for journalists to hear, and often the ones that don't get as much airtime as larger companies or things like that. And I've always been very passionate about different social causes. So it's a nice way of kind of marrying personal and professional interests into one project.
Nice. Thank you. So before going into your own personal project, I'd like to talk about Amazon Frontlines, which is actually how we met, because I wanted to get in touch with them. It's a very cool NGO that you've been working with. So can you maybe tell us a bit more about what they do and how you've been working with them?
Sure, of course. So Ruby Group and I am based out of Miami, and between Miami and different countries in Latin America, depending on the time of year. But for the past year, I had been living in Quito, Ecuador, and I had come across Amazon Frontlines, which is an organization that works throughout the Amazon in Ecuador, parts of Colombia, and Peru. And they work with indigenous communities in the Amazon to work on a lot of land preservation projects, cultural preservation, community empowerment, even providing legal support to these communities who are often disenfranchised by different governmental policies or things like that. And I think that within the Ecuadorian let's say space, Amazon Frontlines definitely is one of the most prominent organizations working with indigenous communities on climate action projects, on community preservation projects, and things like that. And so in January of this year, I joined the team and started working with them, handling specifically their international press. And that was a very interesting position to be in, because often you don't, these types of organizations perhaps don't have that connection with international press, or not these organizations, but the stories, the communities of people living on the ground. And it's been really interesting working with them and helping shed some more light on the great work that the entire team is doing, and the reality of the different indigenous communities that they work with.
So you've been working on a specific project with them, or did you just join as a...
So they're one of my clients that I work with. So I was handling specifically their international press. So throughout the year, whenever there were monumental announcements or different projects that came to fruition, I would then be in charge of sending that out to international journalists based in the US, in Europe, around Latin America, and raising the profile of these different things that are happening. So, for example, a big one was in February, the Constitutional Court, or like the Ecuadorian Supreme Court, made a decision saying that all indigenous communities need to be, if a government or a private company wants to start some type of mining or extractivist policy on indigenous land, the indigenous community needs to give their free, prior, and informed consent before any project can begin. And that was a really monumental decision, because so much in the history of Latin America and around the world, if a government wants a certain resource, then they'll go into a territory and take out whatever they see fit without really paying attention or caring about the lives and the impact that that practice is having. And although this has now set a new precedent in Ecuador specifically, I've seen that this case has been referenced even in other articles or different activist projects around the world. I think of one specifically in Guatemala, another one in Australia, where they were saying like, look, the government, the people's rights need to be respected. And in this case, it was so big because how often are the little guys the protagonists and the winners of the story? So that moment was a really big moment when I was able to get different attention from journalists and from media outlets from around the world to speak with some of the community activists and leaders who had been leading the fight against the government and showing them the reality of what it's like, what these communities are facing on a day-to-day basis. Actually, coincidentally, the day that the decision was made, I had organized a press trip for a couple different international media outlets with their Ecuadorian-based journalists to go to the Amazon and visit the community. And so we came back from a little boat ride, and then we got word that the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of the Aikofan, the Sinangoe community. And it was like, oh, wow, how exciting. We're here. We're able to like experience this together. The journalists are able to see how happy like the community was. And it's not just a matter of thinking about it or talking about it in the what if, but in the, okay, this happened and now what? Really like forward thinking and things like that. So that was a really nice time.
And how do you go about like, choosing the journalists or getting in touch with journalists? Because as you said, like you don't always hear about the little guys in the big media, especially for mainstream North American or European media. It seems really far. Even if we talk, like we know that what happens in the Amazon is definitely very important and has an impact on everyone. And indigenous rights have been, being more and more mainstream over the last years. But yeah, like how do you get the attention? How do you pick the good journalists, like the good storytellers, to transmit the story to the rest of the world?
That's an interesting question, interesting way of phrasing it. I think that my training and my experience, a lot of it comes from the corporate PR world. So that means I'm working with big companies and getting like media coverage for a new product launch or a new executive announcement or something like that. And it was interesting as I started working with Amazon Frontlines, because a lot of the times when I email journalists about like this new product was launched, I never hear back. No one responds to me. I follow up because it's like, that's not necessarily media worthy, or that's not really moving the needle anyway, one way or another. And the interesting thing about working with Amazon Frontlines is that people are interested in what's happening in these places. And I think that it's a matter of finding journalists who have previously written about related topics, whether in Latin America or in other parts of the world. But finding people who are interested in that kind of intersection of human rights, environmental rights, politics, perhaps economics. And the way that you would pitch each person will really depend on what their interest is and what their beat is and what they cover. And with that, you can kind of show them, okay, well, if you're interested more in politics, then let me gear what I'm showing you and what I'm telling you to that perspective, as opposed to if you're more interested in human rights. And I think that as we're dealing with these larger global issues like climate change, like resource extraction or supply chain issues, or geopolitics in general, a lot of media are interested in like connecting these dots and seeing how macro policies are affecting smaller people or local people. So that's a really nice niche for, I think, a lot of these different organizations, whether nonprofits or small, like entrepreneurial businesses or things like that that they're working in, because those are the stories that really matter, as opposed to just some type of bland press release. But people really want to know, who are the faces of the community that are being affected? Who are the leaders? Who are the people that are having a voice? And like, how can we help amplify that? And so it's nice being the connector between those two of like, okay, journalist A, you need to talk to activist B, and that will be a really great conversation. And that's often what happens.
And like, so you said you used to work with bigger company, more traditional big companies. How did you how did the transition happen to, because PR usually, I'm a journalist, PR are not our best friends. I'm sorry, but nothing against you, but like, there is conflict of relationship between those two groups. So, what happened for you to decide to focus on a specific group of clients that would, have purpose, as you say?
So I can't totally say that I still work with some corporate clients.
Okay.
So they are still part of my ecosystem, but I definitely, as I'm building a business that is more reflective of me and my interests, I am thinking about things and looking for those more mission-driven organizations, because I think that corporations have an important role in larger economics, but I think that unfortunately, those big guys are always the ones with the money. And that doesn't mean that because another organization or cause doesn't have the money, that their perspective shouldn't be shared. And I think that the conflict that you're talking about between PR people and journalists is often just that misunderstanding between what you as a journalist want and you're interested in, and what I may be pushing, which may not necessarily be in alignment with you. But I think that goes back to really the story that we're sharing. And that's where I think it's the work of the PR professional to really find, what is that angle? How can I add some insight into this topic by highlighting a specific person or story or impact, as opposed to just the overarching kind of promotional idea. And I think that it was interesting that an organization like an Amazon Frontlines, and I'm sure there's other ones around around the world that also have kind of an international press consultant. It's interesting that they're putting part of their budget to that, because it shows that they're thinking about how they're acting, or like what they're saying, what they're doing, and then how they're impacting. And I think that you need to have all of those different points kind of aligned in order for a company to be have a cohesive branding and communication strategy. And so by giving journalists the opportunity and giving these organizations the opportunity to speak with journalists, it's like that's where the relationship building even comes in on my end of like, okay, I know someone from the editor of the Wall Street Journal in Mexico City. Okay, what kind of topics does he care about? Would he care about this, or is it better suited for someone else? And by the PR professional knowing really how to seed those different stories with those people, that's where we can have the most impact, both for our client and then also the journalist, give the most value to the journalist.
And how are you with the people when they meet? How those meetings go? What kind of the conversation, is it different than the one you're used to?
So it depends. If I am on site, let's say, if it's in person, if we're doing in-person interviews or something like that, I'm definitely there. If it's virtual, I will likely be on the Zoom call as well, because I'll likely be coordinating that. But if it's also, but sometimes whether the spokesperson feels very comfortable or the journalist already has an existing relationship with the spokesperson, sometimes I'll just kind of coordinate the time and they'll talk on the phone. But I always try to kind of prepare my clients before speaking with the journalist to at least know, like, okay, these are the important topics that they care about. These are this is the way that you should be responding to their questions. These are the ways that you should be kind of framing your story so that it is in a cohesive way and interesting for the journalist to easily pick up and write a story and run with it.
Is this a problem like coming from the organizations that they don't always know how to tell their stories, where to share them? And yeah, is that a problem you meet? Because there are so many things happening on the ground, very small or very big, and we don't really often hear about them. So could that be one of the reasons, and why, what is it that they don't do in the way they should, or some advice?
So I'll say, I mean, unfortunately, that's a problem that impacts kind of everyone, the small organization to the multinational company, of just not having a cohesive, not always having a cohesive communication strategy. And that's where communications professionals can really come in and help align things. Because I think that so often when you're working for the company or organization, you're in that world and universe. And so you're thinking like every little thing is the most important thing, and that needs to be communicated to international media or journalists. And media is obviously going to care because we, company or organization, are doing this thing, when in reality, I'm sure you can speak to this, journalists have however many beats they're covering, however many topics they're covering, or articles they're producing a day, a week, a month. They only have two hands, one brain and two hands. And so there's not enough time for everyone to be on top of everything at the same time. And so I think that that's when it's important for whether the PR professional or the organization or company themselves to really be that filtering system and say, okay, we have this monumental announcement coming up at the end of the month. In between then, we may have 2 or 3 smaller little things, but that aren't that big. So how are we going to either, segment our media list so that we're only reaching out to a few journalists at a time and not overwhelming or overwhelming them or kind of like burning them out with our news and with our story, but also understanding, okay, what's relevant for different tiers of media. In the case of Amazon Frontlines, for example, there's the events that are happening on a national level and that are very important to national media because it's involving the president, it's involving an indigenous leader, it's involving a community, and very localized topics and information. And so any types of these like kind of little achievements may be relevant for them. However, it's not going to be something that I would say, yes, let's go and pitch the New York Times about it, And so it's a really matter of differentiating between and seeing, okay, what is relevant for this audience? How can I share it to them? And how can I really package it to them easily so that when I'm reaching out, the journalist already has the top line information, images, video, if necessary, quotes, if necessary. If they want to have an interview, availability of the spokesperson to be there, be on time, be ready. And that can be challenging. And I think that's perhaps what the journalists don't see happening on the other side of just the coordination that is happening in order to deliver things as seamlessly as possible, because we know that you're running around and there's a lot going on.
Always. So Amazon Frontlines is doing many things, as you talked about, but they have one program that I find as a journalist especially very interesting, which is where they have journalists teaching indigenous people storytelling, not in a way like how to tell the stories, because they know how to do that very well, but
Mm-hmm.
how to use like film and photography and other techniques
Mm-hmm.
to be able to share, more broadly. Have you seen any results of this? How's it going? Like, how the people, feel like
Mm-hmm.
did it have any impact?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that's definitely one of the more beautiful projects that the organization has been working on. Just because I think whenever you give people the tool to tell their own story, it's just they're seeing things through a different lens, and I think that uh, a lot of the communities have such like an intimate relationship, for example, with the nature and jungle, or land around them. So to be able to see the leaves or the trees or their family interacting with these very normal but beautiful scenes is always like very inspiring. And so I know that Amazon Frontlines has worked with different communities on producing kind of short documentaries specifically uh, to help record different stories or legends or generational knowledge that
Mhm.
is passed down verbally, but not always written. And so I think that specifically film and photography are great mediums um, for to really kind of help that process and that documentation process. And it's even better when that can come from the community members themselves as opposed to a third party coming in. Although we always welcome journalists from around the world to come down and shoot their own things and get their own perspective on the situation, because that outside view can also be enriching.
Mhm.
But it's really nice when you see how even people are getting more familiar with these different kinds of communication tools, like filming things and taking pictures or using social media, which I think now is obviously so important on so many levels. And so being able to kind of even elevate their message from just what they're saying in local forums or through an organization like Amazon Frontlines, through their own medium and through their own voice, is definitely a great way to also have an impact on communities and people around the world.
Mm. And so you said, so you get in touch with the journalists that don't
Hmm.
always have so much time, as
Hmm.
we know.
Hmm.
But are they also able to find those stories without, if you're not there, to kind of, you know, give it to them? Say like, hey, this is happening. Do they
Hmm.
know where to look for it, or how to get in touch with the people? Because I think that can also be an issue. Like
Do you
it's
mean specifically when you say the people, do you mean like community leaders or do you mean uh
agents of change, people on the ground doing
oh,
things.
okay. Okay.
Um,
I definitely think that I think that yes, the journalist can, of course, find the executive director or someone else from an organization to reach out to, or a community leader. But I think that the value of, I'll say, my position is in that kind of coordination and in that really joining of the two groups, because yes, people can have an idea of what they want to say, who they want to meet and things like that, but it is different being on the ground.
mm,
There was a couple months ago I met like a 15-year-old boy, and he was like, I want to be a YouTuber and I want to go to indigenous communities and document their languages and help them and things like that. And he was very passionate and very representative of the like generation alpha that's coming into be. And I was like, okay, but like, how are you going to find those communities? I don't know. I'll just walk around and hopefully someone will want to talk to me. And I'm like, okay, yes, you can do that. Or you can go through people who already have established relationships with
mm,
communities, with people. They already know who the players are. And so that's really what can just help facilitate things as opposed to going in blind and just trying to kind of make things happen. I even think of a trip that I organized for a journalist from Reuters to visit some different communities in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And she relied heavily on me to even plan out the route of the trip of like, okay, it takes 9 hours by car to get from Quito to Lago Agrio. Or you can take a flight that's only, I don't know, less than an hour. You decide what you want to do, but if you have no idea that there's only one route and it's going to be 9 hours, then you'd be there just kind of like, wait, what am I doing in this car? So I think that just kind of having those local connections and knowing the people, I think also is a really important point. I think that naturally so, a lot of communities may be skeptical of just a random person showing up and asking questions. And by having the kind of relationship and credibility of an organization that has been working in the region for years, that automatically just kind of gives you some credit and credibility that I think is important, because to someone in a community, maybe they don't know who Reuters is, or they're not impressed by the Associated Press when you flash that card. Although, to someone outside of there, you're like, oh, wow, AP, that's great, or any of these kind of really big global publications. So yeah, I think that that's really like the value of being those connectors, and helping to bring people together when it's most important.
And just remind me, because so you talked about this young boy that sounds very ambitious, and how he gets places and gets to tell stories. Is that also because he's like, I want to go record, I want to tell the stories, which is also a problem, like, or a situation that we have, that outsider journalists want to come in and tell the story from their point of view. When you work with the journalists, is it important for you to let the people from the ground tell their own stories from their own point of view, or just like a third person thing?
So I think that anytime a journalist is going to a community or covering any type of topic like this, they definitely want their own exclusive interview. Because I think that, yes, although media, different publications or people can have their own personal biases, they're always looking at things through a particular lens. So if they're looking at women's empowerment, then they're going to want to speak to different female leaders and see how they're impacted, how an extractivist policy is impacting them. And I think that that's kind of where their story even gets richer, because if you're just relying on, a document that's prepared with different bullet points saying like, this is the reality, this is what's happening, this is how it's impacting people, without hearing the voice of people and even thinking about how they're expressing their thoughts, then it's just, I don't think it's as rich of an experience for the journalist, and then later on in the process for the reader, because then you're just reading, you're reading a regurgitation of words, but you're not getting that empathy or that feeling of that emotional connection with the story, which I think a lot of in the event that the journalist can't participate or anything.
Okay, so now I'd like to talk a bit about your agency, because from Amazon Frontline, they're great, but they're not the only people you work with. So can you tell us a bit more about the process, of creating this? Because it's very specific. I don't know, I haven't heard really of this kind of communication agency. So yeah, tell us more about this and what's kind of unique about it.
Sure, definitely. So as I mentioned, I started Ruby Group in June of last year. I had been working for a couple different corporate agencies in Miami, and I just kind of got to a point where I was like not feeling fulfilled by that work. And simultaneously, I had been wanting to kind of transition out of Miami and live in some other countries. And the opportunity arose for me to go to move to Ecuador.
Mhm.
And I think been um, it's been interesting because now that I'm a little over a year down the line and in the process of seeing kind of what has taken me here or how things are continuing to evolve. Um, because I think that um, I don't want to say that I work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. I think that I'm more interested in working with organizations that have a purpose or a company that has a purpose. And that's kind of the driving force of what they're doing. And so when I'm looking at new clients that I may want to start collaborating with, it's very much thinking like, okay, what is the bigger picture here? I don't want to be just kind of like a microphone for you and your company, but I want to be telling or connecting you with interesting stories, connecting you with interesting people. And I think that so it's nice because I'm in that position where I can choose who I want to work with. I'm not having the top down kind of role where someone's telling me what I need to work on, but rather, okay, this is an interesting project. These are interesting people. These are interesting stories, and let's see how my experience creating communication strategy or handling international press or creating the branding for something can come together to really elevate the brand or organization that's there.
Okay. Um, so do you think like that's something that organizations should really look for, like this kind of, I mean, of course, you're going to say yes, but like if you could argument a bit, on
Mhm.
why, and yeah.
Mhm. I mean, I think that regardless of the organization, whether big or small, having a succinct communication strategy is very important.
Mhm.
Um, it doesn't have to mean that like you have an agency on retainer and they're um, they're pushing out news for you every month or week because a lot of companies or organizations may not have the need. But what is important is for there to be that consistent, not just line of communication, but that consistent voice and that consistent narrative going throughout the organization. So meaning, okay, the website, what's on the website is also reflected on the Instagram page, which is also reflected on the LinkedIn page, which is also reflected on the personal profiles or the profiles of the employees, or everyone's using a similar tone, everyone's using a similar almost aesthetic even, to create that kind of cohesive culture. And I think that communication specifically plays a nice role because it's that tie that can really nicely bring these different elements together when you're thinking of, the marketing side of things, the branding side of things. Communications is kind of, I mean, I see it perhaps because I'm a communicator, but I see communications as that really like foundational thing that can tie together these other elements. So I think it's important.
Yeah. When we talked a bit before this, we talked about impact-oriented journalism.
Mhm.
Um, so can you like maybe tell us a bit more about what it is, if we have some people who don't know, and also how do you make sure that this is kind of the story that comes out fits into this kind of journalism, which is not one that every single media practices.
Mhm, mhm. So, I guess understand and interpret impact journalism in the sense that the coverage that journalists are generating is going to have a larger impact on the cause or program that they're covering. And I think that the best way to ensure that, I think it comes, there's a couple different angles. I think the first part is the journalist themselves is likely going to want to make an impact with their story. And I think that that's kind of inherent in the journalist personality of even this larger idea of, always looking for that interesting angle and looking for how can you, ultimately get an award for your journalism and being that innovative person. So I think that by really having the ability to highlight those interesting stories and things that when people are either scrolling on Instagram or scrolling on news channels, um, how they're really seeing what kinds of stories they're clicking on. And I think that that ultimately comes down to like, okay, how are you tying these larger elements together? And like, as I mentioned before, how does the politics impact the human rights issues of different communities? Or how can an economic policy have an impact on land rights for people? And really being able to like connect those dots for readers is the best way for, I think, journalists to make an impact with their work. And from my end, I will try and kind of give the most amount of information and background available that I have on the topic, so that when you as a journalist are arriving on site or speaking with someone, you have an idea of what's going on, and you're not just kind of like walking in blind, but you have some background knowledge, and that can really help formulate your questions and ensure that you're getting the information that you want to, so it can have the most impact ultimately when the final end consumer is reading whatever you're producing or watching, because you can be a video journalist as well, whatever you're producing.
Yeah, and actually we have a question from Giovanna, was asking like, how do you measure this impact that you talk about as a result?
So I think that it depends. I think you can definitely have there's the quantitative and qualitative. I think that the quantitative, let's say, I'll say from the PR side, the kind of metrics we use will be the number, like the circulation of the outlet. So, okay, once you secure a media clip, these are the number of people, generally speaking, who will have the chance to kind of see the coverage. You're also seeing kind of like, okay, based on this program or topic, these are the number of articles that have been published about it. That would also show impact. And then thinking more on the qualitative side, I think that comes down to the depth of the story and the level of engagement that the journalist was able to obtain during their, I'll say, like, immersion process. So were they asking interesting questions? How did the interviewee even feel after the interview concluded? Did they feel like this person heard and understood me, or did they feel like there were misunderstandings, and that's going to prevent the journalist from producing a really interesting final topic? And then also, once you have that kind of end story and that final story, it's then the next step of through let's say a social media or through other channels, continuing to promote it and seeing how people continue to receive that news. And so then you're seeing, okay, this is a topic that people are interested in because after we reposted this article from a journalist, we got this many likes on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And I think ultimately, if you're the article that you're writing is looking to make an impact on larger like political policy, let's see and how stakeholders reacted to that. So I'm even thinking, for example, in June of this year in Ecuador, there was a indigenous-led protest that kind of shut down the country for almost 3 weeks. And the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador was basically protesting against the government, saying, you're not listening to us. You're raising fuel prices, you're raising the cost of food, but you're not raising our salaries. You're infringing on our land. You want to extract more oil, but then that means that our sovereignty is being impacted. And obviously, there was a lot of media coverage around that. I was lucky enough to be coordinating interviews between some journalists and spokespeople to give them more insight into what was happening. And the interesting thing there is like, okay, if an international media publication writes about this topic and really talks about the impact and why this is important and can elevate it to the international audience level, then the government has to be put in a position of like, oh, wow, okay, now the New York Times is talking about what's happening. Now it's really big international news, and I need to think about how I'm going to respond. Because if it's just like, you know, a local publication, it can be dismissed and maybe it's not that important. But when you're having that kind of volume about a certain topic, and then you're seeing like, okay, the media is putting pressure on the different stakeholders to respond, to act or react in a certain way. And that's when you know, like, okay, if I were able to, you know, push the president, and of course, it's not just from one, you can't accredit it to just like one journalist or one media article. But I think collectively, the media can very well push that larger public conversation and even perception on different topics that are being discussed on a daily basis.
And that in this specific example, did you see, you know, a result, or did people mention, okay, we did this because the attention got in? Like, could you get a bit more into specifics about the real impact it had?
So I would definitely say that, I mean, I will never know the full truth because I wasn't working on, let's say, Lasso's communications team. However, I think that by giving a voice to the Indigenous leaders during this time of protest and connecting them with a variety of international publications. So people from the US, people from like pan-regional Latin American outlets, journalists from Europe, from the UK, from really around the world, by putting, even you think of like the aesthetics of it and the visuals of it, by putting this person's face on the front page of these different international outlets, that has an impact because it's like, okay, wait, it doesn't matter how many people, like I'm thinking of the president's communications team, when that person wakes up and is doing a media monitoring report to see how many mentions there were of the president in the past, or of the situation in the past week or day, and you're seeing coverage all over the world, you're like, okay, wait, I, as the head of state, need to react and respond accordingly because now I'm receiving pressures from whether it's other governments, whether it's investors or business owners or whoever his stakeholders are. And that's when it's like, okay, cool. You're seeing how these different points are kind of coming together and connecting to position and to position a narrative and just give visibility to that person and message and everything like that.
Okay, thank you. And I like that you also mentioned that the impact is also, you know, how people feel once they've been interviewed, because it's sometimes, you know, some journalists, they get in, they get the stories they want to, but the people stay behind, you know, they're still there with their stories and their real life. And that's something some people tend to forget. So I like that that's something you pay attention to and get into the impact aspect of it. We have a few questions from people. If the people watching have more or want you to go back on specific, please ask away in the comments. One of the questions would be, so because you seem very engaged, you know, in the impact you have, and the work that you do from different perspective can also feel a bit like a fixer. For the people watching who don't know, fixer are people that help journalists when we go places we don't really know. They help us getting around, getting interviews, knowing the people that we need to talk to. Like you can be sometimes maybe a bit of the verge. Have you been tempted to go more into like an active process and maybe more activist in a way of really getting the stories out without having such a corporate aspect to it?
Um, I mean, I don't think so. I
Mm.
mean, I guess I'm not sure if I understood the question, because I feel it wouldn't be my place, or in talking to you about this work, in talking to my friends, in talking to anyone that I necessarily meet about the work that I do, I think that's my kind of form of activism and kind of awareness raising that I'm doing about these different topics. I think that it wouldn't necessarily be my place to um to be an activist in for some of these topics when I'm not living that reality. You
Mm.
know, I think that if I'm being an activist about a cause, I want it to be a cause that I'm passionate about and that I'm directly impacted by. Um, I think that by me putting my kind of work hours towards a cause that I'm interested in, and that a larger organization that has impact, I think that's kind of the best way that I can help, and that's my drop in the bucket uh, without feeling like I need to be the one, on the front lines. Although I'm happy to go and protest when it's when it's a topic that I'm interested about. And in Ecuador, actually, there's a lot of stuff happening in the Amazon. It's a very like
Mm.
hot place. But in when was that? Maybe like February or so, an activist friend of mine organized a protest in Tena, Napo, Amazon kind of region, and against illegal mining and the impact that that was going to have on local communities' water supply. And it was really beautiful for me to be there, for me to stand and protest with people, because there were easily maybe like 5,000 people in a relatively, I mean, it's the capital of this province, but it's still a small city. To be there protesting and saying, you know what, we don't want this. We don't want illegal mining to happen. We need to preserve our water. And I think just kind of walking in solidarity was the most that I could do at that time, because I'm not a resident of Tena as much as I may
Mm.
want to be. I'm not, that's not my life, but I can stand in support. And I think that's a powerful position to be in as well.
All right, fair enough. Another question is, what part of your job fulfills you the most?
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, so I love to travel. And I think that the fun thing about working in PR is it allows you to travel depending on where your clients are. If there's an event or something that needs to happen, um, you have to go there and coordinate, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we as PR professionals do is a lot of just coordination. And I think of, for example, the press trip that I took with journalists in February to Sinangoe in the Ecuadorian Amazon. That was so beautiful and such a beautiful experience for me, because it's like, wait, my job is sending me to the Amazon jungle to explore around with people and like see how another culture lives, which is something that I would like to do um, on my own, let alone now I'm getting paid for it, you know? And so that is just, I think those moments are really special, just when you're um, seeing how things kind of uh, you're getting able to experience it, and you're not just like sitting behind a computer sending emails, but you're really like living the story, and even meeting those people. Because it's one thing to, of course, as we all know, it's one thing to speak with someone virtually, but then to shake their hand or give them a hug or say hello in person and see their smile, that means so much more. So being able to work with interesting clients that allow me that opportunity to travel and even just expand my worldview has definitely been very fulfilling.
Nice. Also, like, do you have maybe final advice for NGOs, people on the ground that would, they're trying to get their stories out,
Mm-hmm.
how they could, because maybe not everyone has the money to pay
Mm-hmm.
someone like you. It's a budget.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important budget, to have, but
Mm-hmm.
not everyone is at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you could give away a few advice.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I think that one of the easiest ways, like I was actually reading an article about this the other day of kind of the value of people, of thought leaders now is in the kind of free advice that people can give, or the access that people have to kind of free mediums, namely a social media or a blog or something like that. I think that for organizations that don't have a budget for a person dedicated exclusively to international press, I think that by having other kind of just written and photograph or video content that can be shared, whether through an Instagram or the website blog or something like that. That's a relatively easy way. I understand that it's time consuming, but it's a great way to just get your message out there so that when someone is, Googling whatever cause you're working with or organization you're working with or anything like that, there's already a register and a record of, okay, wait, someone has already been working on this topic in the past, and there's already resources available for me to contribute or to like investigate further. And I think even now more so, like the way that the TikTok algorithm just can kind of, videos can go viral so easily. It's like, okay, well, play with that medium. Not everything always has to be so serious with the content that you're pushing out. Of course, if it aligns with your brand voice and everything like that. But it's like, okay, maybe people just want to see what it's like for people to be dancing together. And that kind of video could go viral and get a lot of visibility and eyeballs on whatever your organization does or the community that you're working with or something like that. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for people to play with these different mediums. Although I understand that it takes time and effort, and we're always running 1,000 miles an hour. But if someone internally can handle that, I think that would be a great place for anyone to start.
Okay. Okay, we have two questions and same questions, which is a bit more serious. Okay, so what are some of the ways in which you can protect a respondent in sensitive matters? Because
Okay. So,
to make sure, so
okay.
if one of the person you're working for is safety, because sometimes activists, government don't really like the work they've been doing, and like, is this something you take into consideration when you talk to the journalists? How do you make sure they're as safe as possible? We're never sure 100%, unfortunately, but it's something we have to consider.
Definitely. And I mean, that's definitely a very real issue that, activists and leaders can face. I think that from our end, it can be something as simple as using a like encrypted software to like connect with the journalist. So using a Signal instead of, I don't know, a WhatsApp or something, to make sure that your messages are protected. I think that it's also being transparent with the journalist and saying like, okay, I'm able to secure an interview for you with this high profile person. However, this is the rundown in dealing with this person. This is how they need to be respected. This is how the content that you produce needs to be respected. And I think that can also ensure that the message is being properly transmitted to the journalist, because they know that they're going through, they know what to expect going into the interview. So, so yeah. I think that, and in the event that an interviewee doesn't want to be named or doesn't want to be, which happens often as well, I've coordinated those interviews. You can easily tell the journalist, hey, this person will give you information. They will give you insight into whatever happened, but don't want to be quoted. They don't want to be named. They don't want to be identified in any way. And journalists will respect that, because I think you have your own kind of code of conduct and ethics that you follow. And that's also a way to kind of build trust between both parties, so that when there's another announcement that, if you're following a specific topic and you know that you can count on whether me or the spokesperson that I work with for accurate and like juicy information, you're going to be the first person to call me, and I'll be like, okay, perfect. Now's the time to coordinate whatever it may be.
Sounds good. All right. Well, it's been a bit over an hour. So if you have like one last thing, like some kind of resource, maybe a book, a documentary, something you could recommend for people to go check that might be interesting for them.
Okay. Yes. So, a book that I had in mind originally when I was thinking of like, a book recommendation, I wasn't thinking of it specifically in regard to what I do, but it's slightly related, of a book that has had a big impact on me. My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter is a book from a local poet in Miami, Aja Monet. And I really enjoyed reading it because I felt like it was a overview of like women's empowerment and decolonial ideas, and the impact of even like diaspora studies and things like that. And in being kind of from or based in Miami, it is really interesting kind of perspective to have on the role that city has. And I think that it's always nice to kind of promote another local voice in the arena. But yeah, I think that's a great book. There's a lot of great documentaries out on the Amazon, specifically if you're interested in learning more. There's one that I always quote, The Grammar of Happiness, which was really interesting about kind of linguistics, where it was actually a former professor of mine's dad was a missionary in the Brazilian Amazon. And one of the communities that he was working with didn't have any numbers. So their number system was only in terms of like one, a few, or many. And so when you think of how we conceptualize the world and how we think of the world, numbers are so much a part of that, because even you think of your time, we've been talking for an hour, 60 minutes. Okay, what does that mean if you don't think of time that way? And it's a really beautiful story. I think the documentary is on YouTube, so you can watch it for free. But not only are there beautiful shots of the Amazon, and you see what it's like in the Brazilian Amazon, which is, let's say, very distinct from that of the Ecuadorian Amazon. But you're just kind of prompted to think about your own biases and way of thinking, and how these indigenous communities are conceptualizing things differently, and how you perhaps could conceptualize things differently as well.
Okay, well, thank you. It sounds very interesting. Yeah. Well, I think it's time to say goodbye. Thank you to everyone who's been watching. This was the first of what I hope many meetings that we're going to have. It's going to be a monthly thing. So next meeting, it's on October the 18th. And we're going to be talking about solution journalism within conflict. And we're going to be doing that with Tina Rosenberg, which is the founder of the Solution Journalism Network, which is one of the big boss of solution journalism at a very international level. And we'll also be talking with Gina Abogazara, who created a collective called EGAB, who tried to put in contact journalists working in the MENA zone and North Africa and writing solution stories and put them in touch with more international outlets. So that also should be an interesting conversation. So stay tuned. Gilsey, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with us and tell us a bit more about your experience. Thank you to everyone. And well, have a good night until next time.
I'm just going to say one last thing. Thank you again for having me, and for all of the journalists who may be watching, or communications professionals. If you have any other questions, or you're interested in some type of story that deals with something in Latin America, definitely feel free to reach out to me, whether through LinkedIn or email. My email is kelsey@rubygroup.me. And I'd be happy to, put you in contact with people if you're interested in covering any type of topic related to, I don't know, something Latin America, which I know is very broad, but my network is, I know people. So I'd be happy to connect you with anyone who can help enhance your story, and who you can help enhance theirs.
Yeah, we put it in the comments, the links to your LinkedIn page, your email address, and also to the Amazon social media pages and the website, if people are curious to see what's more in this. All right. Well, thank you so much again, and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.